Live.
I'm recording.
Good. All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. We are here with Ashley, one of my favorite energies and people on the planet.
That's so sweet. Thank you.
Well, if you were wondering how I feel about you, two quick housekeeping things. One, I live in Oklahoma. We are expecting severe thunderstorms today, so I made Ashley a co-host. If I suddenly disappear, Ashley will just take it away. And also, I've got a couple, let me cover up the return addresses. I got a couple of the cards for Mo. I'm going to drop them off this weekend. So I just wanted to be sure that I have all of them. So if there's any more I'm waiting on, let me know. So, love your neighbor. Guys, there has never been a better time for a better chapter in the history of whatever I'm thinking the history of. Right? This is Juneteenth. Today is Juneteenth, in the middle of Pride Month, and our country is a mess. It's a hot mess, and there's a lot of things that need repaired. And so as I was preparing for this, I was really doing some research, and I dove in my Bible with the Good Samaritan story and was kind of talking about looking up things about prejudice and things like that. And I found this amazing quote, and I have not been able to stop sitting with it for a couple days. And so I'm going to share it with you. I can post it later if you'd like. It's so powerful. There is a woman in women's ministry. Her name is Beth Moore. And she also preaches to men now. She was in the closet with that for a while. Now she preaches to men. Come on out, woman. So her name is Beth Moore, and this says, prejudice propagates from the notion that if two people are different, one of them has to be better. Wow. And I've been thinking so much, watching everything going on in our country with the racial tensions, and keeping in mind that it's Pride Month, and thinking about all of these people that think differently maybe from me, look differently, believe differently, act differently, and really going introspective on what I think and what I believe. Hi, Kelly. And one thing that just stands out so much to me is that prejudice does propagate from that. If we're different, Ashley, if you and I are different, one of us is better than the other one. So, Ashley, let's just get to talking.
All right.
Let's just get vulnerable and awkward real quick.
I don't know if it's awkward because it's kind of where I live. So I agree to a certain extent that prejudice comes from that. There always seems to be a power differential. My first thought was actually, and this might just be my perspective, but I think it probably is most women's perspective. If we're in a room or in a situation where it's us and a man, the expectation is automatically you're lesser as the female. Still in our country at this, right at this time. I'll actually tell a little story that because I think it's important to know. And I thank God this happened within the company that we have. And at the time, Mo was leading the company. I qualified at some point in my team leader career to be in the top 25. And Mark Willis and Mary Tennant would take the top 25 team leaders to dinner. So the first time I had that experience, they took us to dinner at Three Forks in Austin, really high-end restaurant. And I've grown into being a little bit more polished. I was not polished at that time. And I was terrified to be in that group because Mo wasn't there, but she had done kind of a little talk with us first. Then we went to dinner. And because it was Mark and Mary, that's why Mo wasn't there. It was very comfortable and loose. But Diana was there, a whole bunch of the leaders at that level, and then these 25 team leaders. And most of us didn't know each other. And we got up from the table, this long oblong table, and stood in part of the room to do introductions. And Mark would say, well, Stephanie, tell us who you are. And everybody would tell about it was almost all women. Actually, I think it was all women that time. And they would tell about their husband and their kids. And I just stood back and didn't say anything I was the last one to go. And Mark finally called on me, and I didn't, again, know him or Mary or anybody else in the room. And to know how a gay person feels when they are in a collective of people who are not gay and don't know they're gay, and then know you have to come out to all of them at one time. You don't expect the best thing to happen. And part of how I deal with anxiety is through humor. And so I went right into talking about my kids, and gave everybody my kids' names and little stories about them, and then told everybody my kids had 4 legs and my partner and I had been together for 10 years or whatever it was. And the humor allowed everybody to kind of lean into the space. And yet the conversations that happened after that were, oh, we didn't know. Anyway, so when prejudice, I believe, can come from not believing you're good enough, but I think it might be from the person who would be prejudiced against more often than not, because we already feel less than.
Yes.
Where I think it comes from primarily is fear. And we were talking before you started this about my spirituality. Through COVID and being at home, I've re-listened to Conversations with God 6 times. If you haven't listened to that, I would encourage you to. And the major premise there is that we as humans have only 2 true motivations: fear and love. That's it. Everything we do comes out of one of those 2 places. And so prejudice to me comes from fear, because what we don't understand or know or have experience with as humans, we fear. And until we have the experience and know, that fear really can't go away. Now, I can say that with my own, by the way, we all have prejudices. There's just no getting around it. And to say you don't means you haven't gone introspective enough. I think what Mo's a great demonstration of, and what this chapter is a great demonstration of, is even with those prejudices, still act out of love constantly. You can't lose if you do that.
So let me ask you a question. In this chapter, we talk about, the name of the chapter is Love Your Neighbor. So I want to, Ashley, who is your neighbor? How would you define a neighbor? Like, I know what the Bible says.
Right? It's everybody on the planet.
Yep.
And even though we have that fear, first of all, we're being constantly programmed. Every experience we have is programming or reprogramming us in some way. And I've done a lot of travel in my life. Luckily, I am very fascinated by human beings. I studied sociology and religion to a huge extent. And so you get exposed to lots of different kinds of people. And my belief is the number of commonalities we have far, 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 far outweigh the differences. And I like to be curious about the differences. And I know that maybe that's not how most people experience the world, but it's the fun way for me to experience it. So I don't have much fear around differences we may have, except when I do, because I haven't had enough exposure.
Yep.
Right. And to me, it is all that exposure. As we were going through this, and when the George Floyd thing happened a few weeks ago, I grew up in a very multicultural background, but somehow in the last 10, 15, 20 years, my world has become monochromatic. It's pretty white, and that not by intent. It's partly where I live. San Diego actually is not exactly the bastion of diversity. Part of it is the industry we're in. It's a very white industry. And I think I won't say I have to take responsibility to go expose myself more, because by default, it's not going to happen. And have been doing that since. And it's wonderful. Much more colorful world is much more fun world. So anyway, to answer your question, it's everybody. And we all have much more commonality than you would just assume.
I agree. My thoughts are all over the place. I wish we had 6 hours together. 2 things. One, I want to ask you about your recent Zooms with your guests. I can't remember the gentleman's name. I want to find out about that. But I also want to share with you the first time you and I do self-awareness pretty hard. And I remember I wasn't always that way. And I had crazy, so Church of Christ upbringing, very, you earn your salvation and you need to be right, you need to do right. And when you're not, like if you stub your toe and say a bad word, God's not even hearing your prayers. That's my background. And I went on a mission trip to Ukraine when I was in majoring in Bible at a Christian college. I ended up dropping out, by the way, because I wanted to be, I was a Bible major and I was in the Preacher's Wives Club, and I wanted to do cool things with my degree. But at the time, women were just good for making sandwiches.
And baby.
So, yep. So I dropped out. And anyway, so I'm in Ukraine and I go over there with a group of friends, and we're teaching people English. And I had two experiences that I thought were absolutely defining moments for me in my personal growth and in learning to study things for myself and figure out what I believe. So one was, over there, it's customary, they drink sweet tea or vodka like we drink sweet tea. And if you even take a couple sips, they refill it. So don't sip it. And I learned that the hard way at age 20, where I wasn't allowed to be drinking yet. So we go, and this family has us over to eat, and they have vodka all on the table. I'm like, well, this is really gross and I don't want to be rude. So I kept drinking it. So did the others I was with. I mean, we are hobbling home to find our flat. We have no idea where we are, what we're doing, how to speak in Russian to say, excuse me, where's the bathroom? Or how much is this? It was a train wreck, and it was one of the most fun experiences I've ever had in my life. And then the other one, they are Russian Orthodox there very much in Ukraine. And they light candles, and they have icons and monuments, and they can kiss pictures and do different things like that, which I grew up at that time, that was wrong. Like, it
was idolatry.
It was idolatry, yes. And so I go into this church, and there's an old babushka there. A babushka's grandmother, and she had on her little scarf, and she was alone, and she was on her knees. She was kneeling down in front of some candles. And I just remember watching her, and she was crying. And there was something that she was mourning, and we didn't even speak the same language. I had no idea what was going on. I walked into the building in judgment of her relationship with God. And when I looked into her eyes and saw her grieving and mourning, something in me changed, because what she was experiencing in her spirituality was very real. And I will never forget the woman's face. I can see in my brain every wrinkle, and her bright, sparkling blue eyes, her wrinkled hands, and that really just changed me, because she was having a real moment, and who was I to invalidate that with my programming and my beliefs? Anyway, so tell me about this guy.
That was an experience of, you're so different, but you're so the same.
Yes.
I've learned this in so many different Keller courses, but Diana would always say, everybody has a sign around their neck, and the sign for every human being says, make me feel important. And I think that's true. And I also think that our deepest human need is to be seen and accepted. And I don't care who you are or where you're from, that's it. And that should be enough to bring us together and realize my neighbor is me.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, you were just preaching it right now. What's interesting is when you describe too the situation with all the team leaders together, and how they were mostly women, and how they reacted to you. You know, I'm the boss of our team. And yet when Steve and I are together, like we'll go to family reunion or we'll go to mega camp, who do you think they address? Yeah. It's not me. No. And I just let it happen. And, you know, he doesn't think anything of it, and I don't think anything of it, because we're programmed for that. So this is just a fascinating conversation.
Yeah, we can get glimpses of maybe how the racial divides show up, glimpses through our own little experience. But I do want to say it's a glimpse. And you had asked about the Zooms I'm doing with Emmerich. I immediately thought I need to reach out to Emmerich, because the moment he and I met, Emmerich Peace is a OP in outside of Baltimore, Maryland. And I believe, I may not be 100% accurate on this, but I believe we have 2 African-American or Black operating partners in the entire company, 860 offices. And they both stick out. And Bowman Kitty is one, and Emmerich Peace. And Emmerich and I just go way back. We joined the company about the same time. And for whatever reason, when we first met, literally the moment we made eye contact, it was kismet. And it might be sometimes when you're in a marginalized community, you can feel that in other people. But we bonded very, very quickly. And when all this started to get crazy in the last few weeks, I thought, he and I have had great conversations over the years, and his humor is a lot like mine. And we have little fear about speaking our minds. And we both know we don't know everything, and we're very humble about, God, let me learn more. So I had asked him if he would come on and do one Zoom where we could have an honest racial conversation. And he said yes. And now that has continued, and now we're doing it weekly. And the learning for both of us that's come out of that has been awesome. And his belief is in the absence of a conversation, ignorance prevails. And so we decided we're going to just hold a space for the conversation, because a lot of people don't know how to have it. They're afraid to say the wrong thing, and we're a safe space for each other. So I've said the wrong thing, and he said the wrong thing. And the first one, he said, well, what do you think you should call me, Black or African American? And I'm like, Black, because I don't know if you're from Africa. I don't know if that was right or not, but yeah. So anyway, I would encourage, get on there, watch the ones that we've recorded, and join us on Wednesday, especially if you have questions and you don't have a safe place to ask them. Send me the questions and we'll ask them.
That's amazing. Well, I'll tell you what we did. I'm the leader of the culture committee on our AOC, and on our last culture committee meeting, we had a Black takeover. It was really fun. And I think we only have 5 Black associates right now, Stephanie, 5. 4 of them were able to be on the call. And it was really just, I'm going to shut up and amplify your voice, and I want to hear your experiences and the kind of things that have happened to them just doing real estate. Oklahoma is an open carry state, and most of them are packing heat, and they're licensed anyway because they don't ever want to get questioned about having a gun on them. They're branded all the time because heaven forbid someone not know they're Black, and then they show up and like, oh, you're Black.
We've talked about that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
And just interesting, I don't know how many of your current people are in Oklahoma. The first time I was asked to come teach in your region, I was terrified.
Tell me why.
I've known Mo for years. I was terrified. I thought they are not going to want this lesbian in their office. Because that was my programming about Okies.
Right.
And my experience, by the way, it was the most warm, welcoming room I've ever taught in. I love teaching in Oklahoma now, but I had to get through that fear because the perception is it's not exactly a welcoming. It's a very white bread place.
Yeah, and in the Bible Belt and all of these things, very, very true.
Yeah. All right. So what else do you want to? Can I highlight when I read?
You would take it. I had with everything going on today, and with your ability to just really speak from the heart, I didn't have an agenda going into today.
Okay. So there's one on page 220. She says, and it is kind of the highlight of this chapter anyway at the front end, but she said, I've held the belief that treating people equally and fairly is an important element of a value-based culture. During my entire teaching and business career, I could not and would not tolerate prejudice. And I've seen that in Mo a lot. And I also know she has taken a lot of heat, even in my region. It's not recently, but in the early days, I didn't want to join Keller Williams because there was a very anti-gay sentiment locally. And what's been interesting is to see how Gary and Mo have both responded in this time. And I think they experienced what I did, and probably what all of us did, which was because, a market center only has 4 or 5 Black people in it, we think it's not that big of a deal anymore. When the reality is, it's just kind of gone underground. And the current political environment, everything else that's going on, has now just resurfaced it. And I think we need to be hyper cognizant that in a lot of areas, there's a prevalent mentality, much more prevalent than we thought. And we have to educate ourselves on how we have a conversation and not, my thing right now is if it's love your neighbor, it's love your neighbor, even maybe the racist one, because if you alienate them, you can't influence them.
That's right.
So where do I find common ground to begin a conversation? Now, some people are just going to say, screw it, I don't even want to go there. Then I'm probably going to alienate myself. But for the vast majority of people, if it's just lack of exposure and ignorance, then let's shine some light on it and start having some conversations. And if you're a leader, you can't run from that responsibility.
I love that. And it takes such an extreme amount of vulnerability and willingness to, like you said, say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing. You've got to put yourself out there and start having the conversations and start. My 9-year-old, his best friend, his name is Roman, and he's Black. And as soon as all of this first started happening, I showed my kids the video. I don't know if it was the right thing or the wrong thing, but I'll be darned if someone else is going to teach my kids about this issue. So I showed him the video, and I started thinking about it, and I was like, okay, well, I might need to have a conversation with Roman's mom because I don't want her blindsided by Jason saying something to Roman. So anyway, I texted her, and we have just become really close over this. At the time, she hadn't talked to her kids. She wanted Roman to be innocent as long as possible and not understand how he could be hated and all of these things. And so she said she hadn't talked to her kids. So I told Jason not to say anything, which leads me to a very funny story we don't have time for, where his iPad was on airplane mode and he typed out this big long message about the George Floyd video. And we were like, oh God, if we make our iPad like, if we take it off airplane mode, is that message going to send? Because she hasn't had the conversation. Stop. Like, we were running around for an hour, exporting Facebook Messenger kids. It was a madhouse. And anyway, a couple of days later, she texted me and she said, I want you to know you inspired me to talk to my kid. And we had the talk. And I'm going to get emotional. She said, I said, well, how did he take it? And she said her response was that Roman's response to the conversation was, Mama, that really makes a lot of things make sense. This kid is 9. And so I think it's so important. And I don't think I've ever been more scared to have a conversation, because what if, sure I have, but what if I mess this up and then my kid loses his best friend? I'm thinking all of these things. And what if I say the wrong thing? And what do I even call the conversation? Do I call it the white privilege conversation? Do I say white? Do I say Black? So
I think like and I don't know, I actually don't have human children. I still have a 4-legged child right here. And I had a parent. So I do understand. I can't remember a perfect conversation she ever had with me as a kid. We're going to muck some of it up. I think the importance is have the conversation, be open. Your kids are going to emulate you. If you're open and willing, they're going to be open and willing. And that, by the way, that goes for team leaders who have kids called agents in the office. Same thing. If you're open and willing, they're going to be open and willing.
Why would you ever call us kids? I don't understand where that comes from. Heather, don't say a word.
I have this personal belief that not one of us grow past actual 15. We have the 15-year-old tortured child in us till the day we die.
I agree with that. I'm all of a sudden recalling nope, next topic. So we've got about 4 minutes left. Guys, do you have any ahas or takeaways from this or questions for Ashley? Wendy, go ahead.
First of all, Ashley, you look amazing.
Oh, thank you. I'm excited today we get to do our top 25 lunch. I get to see some of the people for the first time in a while. Some of my kids.
I was just going to say, I actually am the co-culture, whatever you call it.
Co-chair?
Co-chair, thank you. Our culture committee with another agent who's happens to be Black. And we were having a really in-depth conversation because I'm Jewish and I don't vocalize that a lot because throughout my life I have been seeing a lot of prejudice. So I just tend to not, just kind of keep that to myself. And I've actually seen my kids being bullied because of it over the years. And so it's really difficult for me, but it's having the conversation with this other gentleman who we're planning an event called the KW Rainbow event on Monday, and we're going to celebrate all cultural diversities and have a conversation with our whole team.
Wendy, where are you?
I'm with Karen Prawl here in Naperville.
Great.
So we're looking forward to that, July 7th. But we were having a really interesting conversation. You know, I was expressing how throughout this whole thing, I've experienced a lot of prejudice in my life. My daughter's also a lesbian, so I've been very strong with my pride for her. And so I've seen a lot of prejudice for her against that. But he said one thing to me that I'll never forget, which is all those things that I've experienced can be hidden. I can go to KW events. I can go out, and people aren't going to automatically look at me and say she's Jewish or
it's a
or
huge
even
privilege we have.
LGBT. You can hide in a group. And he said, with me, my color, I can't hide it. And so he feels like when he sees people looking at him, he always looks at them back and thinks, what are they thinking about me? Do they think I'm less? Do they put me in a category? You know, do they dislike me because of my color? And he never knows who he can trust. So he said, even though you have experienced prejudice, you can't know what it feels like to never know what people are thinking, because they always can see me, and I'm always different. So
Well,
that was.
And of course, we've talked about this also with Emmerich. If I feel like when I came to Oklahoma, if I feel like I'm going into a place that may not be that safe, I am not going to be waving a rainbow flag.
Right.
Right. So it's more of a benefit in those times where I don't feel comfortable. Emmerich he's never going to look like a 5'2" white woman. Right.
Exactly.
He's a 6'3", 300-pound imposing Black guy. And whether or not this is going to sound horrible, and this is my personal belief, whether or not we want to acknowledge it, most of us we are going to see color first, because it's just a contrast. Doesn't mean it's good or bad, it's a contrast.
Mm-hmm.
And what we have to question is, what is now the emotion behind that? And where does that come from? Is that justified? I had, this is totally off topic, but I think important. Last week, I've been reading a lot about anti-racism and white privilege. And I was walking in the morning and I thought, any person who's done me harm in my past, and we all have it, anybody who's physically done me harm has been a white man. I have never had a negative experience with a person of color. And yet, what would the media and the entire world cause me to believe?
Wow.
Why is that? My own personal experience tells me I have never had a threat in that way. And yet I have from the dominant culture representatives. And anyway, I think it's just an amazing time for us all to start questioning some of those internal emotions we might have. And to recognize that we can't ever we can't even get close to understanding the experience of that person of color, because we can always hide.
Exactly.
We're the dominant society. So if we do have something that's religious based or sexual orientation based, it doesn't have to come up.
Yeah.
I do want to say one more thing.
Yeah.
I do think that having the conversations are so important. And Ashley, you spoke at several of the Lady Leaders events. The one that was at Mega Camp last year, I think it was. Oh my gosh, you just brought me to tears. And sharing your experiences, because I think a lot of people just don't realize what people go through without having those conversations. And that's why this and so many other conversations are so critical right now.
And I think truly that's where we get true connection. So have more conversations. I've met all of you now today, Heather, and that wouldn't happen if you didn't have a real conversation.
Yeah. There's a comment in the Facebook Live that says, Ashley, that doesn't sound terrible to say. It's dealing with reality, and if we don't acknowledge it, we can't move past it.
Yeah.
So
Love that.
speaking it makes it more of a truth than just internalizing.
I think Kelly had one thing, and then we're a couple minutes past. Then Ashley, I'm gonna ask you for your last thoughts, and we'll close out. Kelly?
Yeah, thanks, Missy. Ashley, you and I shared the same coach there for a while, and then our coach went away. And I was assigned a new coach, not knowing who this coach was. I knew the name.
I think we probably have the same coach.
Yes,
Again.
we probably do. And I can tell you, I was so held accountable the first day I met her. I didn't realize how I had that within judgmental. She is Black. And I was shocked at how my response was to her. And I asked for her forgiveness that very first day. And a couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, we got on our call, and I could just see the demeanor in her, because normally she's upbeat, she's very positive, she's got a great big smile on her face. And you know what? That day, that coaching call wasn't about me. I wanted to know about her. And I could just sense that into what the gift she gave me of the understanding of where she was, what she was dealing with. And she even shared with me that at times she was very hesitant in becoming a coach in Zoom with new clients. What were they going to think? Were they going to accept her? And and she had told me too, she said, thank you for your vulnerability and you being authentic and coming forward with our first call and sharing that with me and asking for forgiveness. She goes, that opened up huge doors for us, and we've gotten closer and closer and closer. But I didn't realize where I was.
Yeah. She's amazing. I've had similar conversations with her. She's amazing.
She is. I'm so blessed.
And what a time we both got her.
Yeah.
That was not an accident.
I've learned so much from her in the diversities of people, because we in Prescott, we don't have a whole lot of Blacks. I mean, we probably have 5, maybe 10 in our whole entire community. And why? We don't know. We talk about it. And that idea, Wendy, with your culture event, I want to take that back. I'm also the culture person on our ALC. And I really want to take that back and learn more. So I'll reach out to you. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Kelly. All right, Ashley, any last thoughts for us? Thank you for your vulnerability and your heart. You know how there's some people in your life where everything they do, you think, me too, and are we best friends? And gosh, I love that person. You're my person like that. And I just thank you for being here and sharing so openly.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. And as I was thinking about this morning, I thought, okay, in this whole conversation, I'm probably a little more comfortable than most because I've been having it for a long time. And yet, where is my biggest struggle? And my biggest struggle is with the people that I am fearful of. And it may not be a race, it may not be an ethnicity, I may not be able to quantify them, in the same kind of ways. However, when I start to feel resistance, I need to find and focus on something in the individual that I can love. And that's a constant practice for me. Some days I don't do real great. But if I'm challenged by any person and just feel like, I really get conscious of what can I love about them, because my job is to come from a place of love, not fear. So that would be the one word of wisdom. Some people, it might take a lot of looking to find that thing you can love, but there's something in everybody.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Guys, thanks for being here. And we'll finish out next week. We've just got 3 more sessions, and I'm so glad to see your face. And I wouldn't want to be having these conversations with anybody else. Love you guys.